Hi everyone, in this video I want to talk to you about finishing paintings. It's something I get asked a lot, and it's that age-old question about how do I know when my painting is finished? And it's a tricky one, everyone knows it's a tricky question because some of it is technical and some of it's quite subjective. So I'm going to look at a few of my finished paintings and talk to you about how I go about trying to identify whether something is finished or maybe it needs a bit more work, but using a few simple pointers to decide where that extra work needs to be, why something may be less satisfying than it otherwise might be. So I want to talk to you about three quite specific things that I look for in my own work when I'm trying to make these decisions. And that's the mark making, the composition, and the surface. Don't forget, my next online workshop is coming up at the end of June, and there's also my membership group, which is free to join for the first month. And there are loads of projects on there for you to get your teeth into and inspire you and really push your work forward. So if you're interested in that, please check out the link that's here on the screen. Okay, let's get on. Looking at these couple of paintings in front of me, forget for a minute the actual paintings themselves. I'm not really thinking about these paintings specifically. I just want to talk about the marks that I've made on the surface and fundamentally the variety of the mark making, because if we look at something like this one here, what I like to do in my work is make sure that there is a wide variety of different marks, because I think no matter what kind of painting you're doing, whether it's abstract like this one or more representational, that variety in the mark making is something that's really crucial to hold the interest of whoever's looking at it, whether that's yourself or anyone else. And I think it's a big one. When you look at your paintings, when you go back to your own work and look at them, you can think about it. Did I just use one brush or two brushes or a brush and a pencil or something? Does this painting have enough variety in the mark making? Because it's a big one. Having a wide variety of marks in your paintings can really add to the excitement and interest and energy in the work that you're doing. And if you look at this painting here, and again, like I said, forget about the actual painting itself. You don't need to worry about the image or anything like that right now. Let's just look at the mark and just think about the marks in their own right. Okay, so the mark making in this one, as I was saying, there's a wide variety of different kinds of marks. I've got these big open brush marks here. There's some flat areas underneath which I've worked over the top of, and that's like a separate mark in itself. There's these big wide drawing marks that I've probably done with something like an oil pastel. I've got some smaller drawn marks here as well, and there's some sort of in-between ones here too. I've also got some writing on here, which is another kind of mark, and it's quite different to drawing marks because you're thinking in a different way. So even though I'm using the same pencil as with these kind of swirly, energetic marks up here, I'm treating it in a different way because I'm thinking about it in a different way. So it's a very different kind of mark, even though it's being done with the same tool on the same surface. And then there's a lot of kind of incidental things going on. There's some scratches here, which I'm not sure is going to come out on the camera. I hope it does. I kind of scratched into it with the pencil, worked back over it with a wide brush. So there's lots of layering going on there as well. And up here, I've got some paint, which I think I've kind of dripped on and then worked around. It's got a bit of texture in there as well, which I think was some crumbled up pastel. So overall, even though it's quite a small painting, there's a huge amount of different kinds of marks going on here. And it really adds to that variety, the energy, the movement that I can get within this surface. If you think about it, if you're painting with just one brush and it's all the same size and every mark you put down is the same size, there's a kind of monotonous feeling to it that everything is going to look a bit the same, and you're going to have to work quite hard using that one tool to get the energy and movement into your paintings. So it's the first thing I look for in my work is the variety in the mark making. How many different kinds of marks can I get on that surface to really get the energy and movement and interest going on the painting? Okay, the next thing I want to talk about is composition, and obviously this is a bit of a biggie. There are all sorts of different ways you can think about composition in your paintings, but I just want to talk about some of the things that I'm looking for when I'm trying to decide whether my compositions are working or maybe need a little bit more of a bit more work to get them moving in the right direction. So if you look at this painting here, this is just in one of my books, but if you look at this, it's a bit more of an obvious subject for me. It's about as obvious as it can get in terms of composition in a way, I suppose, because talk about leading lines. The whole thing is about leading lines, and slightly unusually for me, it's a little bit more of an obvious landscape, I suppose. You've got these pathways moving off to a vanishing point, bit of sky up here and some fields and things going on over the sides. The reason I wanted to talk about this one, because it is a slightly more representational composition. And there are things that you do when you're doing more representational work that seem really obvious. Things like leading lines, drawing your eye, drawing the viewer's eye into the painting and retaining it there. And that seems like a really obvious thing to do. You've got these lines moving into the painting, got a kind of perspective, a vanishing point about here. And that seems like a really obvious thing to do when you're painting something that is a bit more representational, like this one. You've got pathways, fields, sky, horizon. So it's a more obvious thing to do. But when you're thinking about slightly more abstract compositions, how do you go about seeing if they work? How do you think about the composition when there isn't such an obvious representational subject? So let's move on to something which is a little less representational. Let's have a look at these ones here. Okay, so yeah, there's still landscape. I mean, with my work, I want my paintings to look like landscapes. I want it to be obvious that it's a landscape. However, within that, there's a huge amount of scope, isn't there? But let's look at this one here, because this has got quite a few of the elements that I like to think about when I'm doing these more abstract compositions. So if I break it down into the main components and kind of think, why do I think this composition works? I think a lot of it is to do with this big light area here. There's this kind of big area here going up into there that's quite light. And that is balanced out by this darker area here, which is kind of looping around the top and back into the image. So I think the main elements of this image are quite strong. You've got this big light area that's kind of echoed by this darker area coming back around this way. And those things give it the structure, they give it a kind of underlying structure. And backing that up, I've got all these different kinds of marks going on as well, which goes back to what we were talking about with the mark making. I've got the small pencil marks, I've got these pastel marks here and all sorts of different brush marks as well. Thinking about the composition, these drawn marks bring your eye down into the image here. And when they get there, they end up looking at these little pink marks here, these pastel marks, and I feel that those are pushing your eye back this way. And when you get there, you've got this shape that's been coming around this way, bringing your eye back round this way into the image. So there's a kind of circular composition going on. There's this light area coming this way, the dark area echoing it, coming back that way, the lines coming down here, these marks coming back this way, pushing your eye back into the center. So all these things are conspiring to hold your attention in the painting. And that's quite crucial. You want these things in your paintings to hold the attention of the viewer in the painting without pushing their eye out to the edge. So you've got all these marks, as I said, conspiring to hold your attention in the image, but there's also a balance of the tones. And again, I go back to this light area here and this dark area here. They're quite well balanced within the image. These are the two main things that I'm looking for when I'm doing these more abstracted compositions. I'm looking for marks which lead your eye around the image and hold your attention within it, and I'm looking for a balance of the tones. So the third thing I'm looking for is a developed paint surface. I really enjoy building up lots of layers in my paintings. So I want to have the surface of the painting to be reasonably even over the whole thing. I'm not too keen on having areas which are a bit empty, a bit thin, and then other areas which are really built up. That's kind of a personal preference, but it's something that I definitely look for in my paintings. I don't want to have unresolved areas that haven't got much going on, or you can still see the surface of the board or canvas coming through. I really like to kind of build them up and build up the surface and really get that interesting layering going on. So that's very much a personal thing, but it is something that I find really important in my paintings when I'm looking to see whether they're finished or not. If I've got some areas which just look a bit undeveloped, there's not much going on, I really want to kind of get something on there and start pushing them forward a little bit. I may knock them back again. I might, like this one behind me, there's a large area here that's fairly light and there's not a huge amount going on in terms of the actual tones, but there's a lot underneath. So I want all that texture and layering to be there because I want the painting to feel mature, like it hasn't just appeared out of nowhere. I like that sense that it's been built up over time. So that's one of the things that I really look for in my paintings, is that kind of mature, developed paint surface. But that is something that tends to come about through the process of working on the other two things that I'm looking for that wide variety of marks, looking to get the balance and the movement and the rhythm of the painting working properly. So the paint surface tends to develop over time while I'm looking for those first two elements. Okay, I hope you found that useful. It's very subjective a lot of the time. Like I said, there's all sorts of different things you can look for in your own paintings, and some of it comes down to personal taste, but those are a couple of things that I look for when I'm doing my work. And I think that when you're painting, they can often get lost. You can often get a little bit distracted, or you started off in one direction and you've gone off on a tangent. It's like, oh, what's happening here? But having some of these things, having these simple ideas to kind of pull it back on track, and those sorts of things to look for when you're trying to decide if something's done or should I do a bit more work. And having those things to look for, I'm looking for, like I said, again, I'm looking for the mark making, I'm looking for the composition, quite specific things within the composition, I'm looking for an interesting paint surface. Having those simple things to look for really helps me to decide whether something's done or whether it needs a bit more work.